have one new message. Translating. Disney and Pixar's Hoppers is now available on Disney+.
You could say that again.
Critics are calling it Pixar's funniest movie ever and a wildly entertaining ride. Blizzard Potato. It's certified fresh and verified hot.
Now we party.
This is incredible!
Wow, I am clearing the rest of the day.
Disney and Pixar's Hoppers, now available on Disney+. Rated PG.
This episode is brought to you by Fox One. Watch all 104 matches of the FIFA World Cup live in 4K for just $19.99 a month, with 3 days free. Build your own multi-view, choose up to 3 streams, and follow player spotlights. Stay on top of every moment with live stats, highlights, and instant replays. The FIFA World Cup, streaming live on Fox One. Offers are subject to change. See fox.com for complete terms and conditions.
And we're live on match day as Doug reaches for a buffalo wing. He's got it! Oh, and he's gone for a can of Pepsi too! What a finish! There's no doubt about it. It just tastes better. Match days deserve Pepsi.
Welcome back to the Murder Diaries. I'm Paige.
And I'm Natalie.
Make sure if you want to listen ad-free, you head over to patreon.com/murderdiariespod. And you can also catch us on YouTube now. On the evening of August 7th, 2007, 44-year-old West Australian Supreme Court Registrar Corryn Rayney left her boot scooting class to head home. She was meeting her husband to discuss terms of their separation and custody of their 2 daughters. Devastatingly, Corryn was murdered that night, her body buried upside down in a grave in nearby Kings Park. Police named only one suspect, her husband, prominent barrister Lloyd Rayney. 5 years after Corryn's body was recovered, Lloyd went to trial for her murder, but he was found not guilty. That didn't change her family's firm belief, though, that he was involved. They continue to fight for justice for Corryn. This is her story.
Used to think it's in my head, but I'm walking with the dead.
To understand who Corryn Rayney was, you have to start long before the headlines, long before the investigation, and long before her name became attached to one of Australia's most talked about murder cases. Corryn Veronica Ann Rayney was born on July 9th, 1963 in Uganda. At the time, the country was living through an increasingly turbulent and dangerous period that would eventually fall under the rule of President Idi Amin. Now, he would become known as the Butcher of Uganda, and his regime is widely regarded as one of the most brutal chapters in the nation's history. When Corryn was 9 years old, her family made the difficult decision to leave. So, in 1973, they arrived in Australia as refugees, carrying with them the experiences and fears of everything they had left behind. Years later, Corryn's father, Ernest Da Silva, would explain that those experiences shaped the way he parented his children. He admitted he was extremely protective of his daughters, something he partially attributed to what the family had experienced in Uganda. Speaking to the West Australian, he said, "When you have 2 girls, that's what you are," he added. "We're a close family. Every day she would call her mom, and when her mom died, every day she would call me." That closeness remained a defining part of Corryn's life. After graduating from Rossmoyne Senior High School, Corryn was accepted into the law program at the University of Western Australia. She had been raised Catholic, but during her university years, she became involved in the school's Christian youth movement and a group known as Christian Witness. It quickly became clear that she was exceptionally driven. After finishing law school, Corryn secured a position as an articled clerk with the Australian Government Solicitor's Office, a role roughly equivalent to a new law graduate training and working under the supervision of experienced attorneys. It was there that she met a junior lawyer named Lloyd Rayney. According to Lloyd, their relationship began with what he later described as love at first sight. The couple married in 1990 at Westminster Presbyterian Church in Bull Creek and began building a life together. Professionally, Corryn's career continued to flourish. She eventually became a Supreme Court Registrar in Western Australia, a position carrying significant responsibility within the state's highest court system. While judges make the final rulings, registrars play a critical role in managing the court's procedures, administration, and legal processes. It's a highly respected position, and one that reflected just how far Corryn had come from the 9-year-old refugee who arrived in Australia decades earlier.
Corryn and Lloyd were often described as a power couple. She was making $200,000 a year in her position and widely respected, while Lloyd was a senior barrister for the Western Australia Department of Public Prosecutions, which was another highly respected position. What really put Corryn in the spotlight was when her name was on the front page of the West Australian as she presided over a bankruptcy proceeding against a real estate agent. The agent had allegedly stolen upwards of $500,000 from his clients. Lloyd and Corryn had 2 daughters, Caitlin and Sarah. One of the parents whose child attended school with girls later told the West Australian that Corryn really did live for her kids. She was affectionate with them. She wanted her daughters to reach their full potential, and she encouraged them along the way. Though Corryn was in a high-pressure position that took a lot of time and work, she still made home-cooked meals and lunches for her daughters and sewed costumes for their school events. She was also a big music fan and loved going to concerts, especially Tex Perkins and Jimmy Barnes. She also loved dancing, particularly boot scooting, which is a country western-style line dance. She attended classes regularly and had many friends in the dance community. The West Australian described Corryn by saying Miss Rayney had close friendships with colleagues at the court, at church, in her dance class, in the neighborhood, and with a handful of mothers from Penrose College. They speak of her warmth and remember her sense of fun, her love for her children, and ability to see the good in people from varied backgrounds. She was as at ease at a Hard Rockers concert or boot scooting at the Bentley Community Center as she was in billionaire Gina Rinehart's private jet. The Chief Justice of Western Australia, Wayne Martin, worked with Corryn and praised her for her, quote, exceptional organizational skills. He said that her ability to connect with others and mediate disagreements was engaging and people-focused, which made her an incredible asset in her position. It seemed as though the Rayneys were living a charmed life in the Perth suburb of Como. Clearly, again, Corryn and Lloyd were highly successful and respected in their careers. To outsiders, it looked like they had everything.
August 7th, 2007 started as an ordinary day for the Rayney family. Corryn and Lloyd both went to work, and their 2 daughters headed off to school. Nothing about that Tuesday suggested it would be the last day anyone would see Corryn alive. That evening, Lloyd stayed home with their younger daughter, Sarah, while their older daughter, Caitlin, went to a Gwen Stefani concert. Corryn, meanwhile, headed to her regular Tuesday night boot scooting class at the Bentley Community Center, about a 15-minute drive from the family's home. For Corryn, this was routine. The class wrapped up around 9:30 p.m., and witnesses saw her leave the center in her silver 2005 Ford Fairmont. It would be the last confirmed sighting of her. Hours later, around midnight, Caitlin arrived home from the concert and went straight to bed. She never saw her mother that night. The next morning, August 8th, Lloyd dropped both girls off at school and headed to work. Corryn still hadn't returned home from dance class. But according to Lloyd, that alone wasn't enough to immediately raise alarm bells. He later explained that it wasn't entirely unusual for Corryn to occasionally stay with a friend rather than come home. But as the morning went on, that explanation became harder to believe. Lloyd said that after arriving at work, he contacted Corryn's office and learned she hadn't shown up. At that point, he reported her missing to police. The following day, August 9th, authorities issued a public missing persons alert, asking for help locating either Corryn or her vehicle. And almost immediately, the case captured public attention. The reaction across Perth was disbelief. Corryn Rayney wasn't someone people expected to vanish without a trace. She was a successful legal professional, a mother, and a well-known figure in the community. News coverage repeatedly described her as an unlikely victim, the kind of person who wasn't supposed to become the center of a missing persons investigation. As the search intensified, Lloyd made a public appeal on August 12th, standing beside Corryn's younger sister, Sharon. Visibly emotional, he told reporters, "All of us are deeply distressed and extremely concerned for Corryn's welfare." Meanwhile, investigators worked backward through Corryn's final known movements. They interviewed the people who had seen her last, her classmates from the dance class. But no one reported anything unusual. No arguments, No suspicious interactions. Nothing that seemed out of place. One of those classmates, Tracy Slynn, spoke to ABC News about the shock everyone was feeling. "I think everybody's just kind of amazed that it could happen, really," she said. "Because somebody you just meet at a class and you're having a bit of fun with and seems not to be depressed or anything at all, and suddenly they just disappear with no reason." Then on August 14th, the case changed drastically. Just before midnight, police located Corryn's silver Ford Fairmont parked along Lovekin Drive in a Perth suburb. The vehicle was immediately seized and sent for a forensic examination. But investigators noticed something unusual right away. Transmission fluid was leaking from the car. And when detectives followed that trail, it led them toward Kings Park, roughly 1.2 miles away. At the end of that trail, they found an area of earth that appeared to have been recently disturbed. And what they uncovered there transformed the investigation from a missing persons case into a homicide inquiry. Buried in what police described as a shallow grave was the body of a woman. She had been placed headfirst into the grave with her knees bent. Investigators later determined that whoever buried the body had accidentally driven over one of the trailhead bollards while leaving the area. The impact damaged the vehicle's transmission, causing the fluid leak that ultimately led police directly to the burial site. It was a devastating stroke of luck. Not long afterward, DNA testing confirmed what many had already feared. The remains belonged to 44-year-old Corryn Rayney. For her family, the confirmation brought an end to the search, but the beginning of a completely different nightmare. Detective Sergeant Mackenzie later recalled notifying Lloyd of the discovery on August 16th. According to Mackenzie, Lloyd was so overcome with emotion that his sister stepped in to help explain what investigators had found. And for Corryn's father, Ernest De Silva, the news confirmed what he'd feared almost from the moment she vanished. The man who had spent decades protecting his family after escaping Uganda told the West Australian, "All through her life, we always knew where she was." Then he added the heartbreaking realization that had settled over the family days earlier. As soon as she went missing, in our hearts we knew that Corryn was no longer with us.
As we discussed the investigation, bear with us that the timeline isn't the clearest from the research we were able to conduct. What we do know is that from the start, investigators had what they believed a really strong suspect in Lloyd Rayney. One of the biggest reasons why Lloyd was immediately drawn to their attention was that the Rayneys' marriage was kind of in shambles. They were in the midst of negotiating through a separation. In fact, the night of Corryn's murder, the two apparently had plans to meet at the house after her boot scooting class to discuss finances and childcare. Corryn's father, Ernest, said that when the two first got married, they were a very normal couple. He didn't really get suspicious about anything until a family trip to Broome. Specifically, Ernest was worried that Lloyd might have been suffering with a gambling problem. Not long after that trip, he had found several form guides, which are used when betting on horse racing, in one of the spare rooms in the house. He went straight to Corryn and voiced his concerns. He goes on to explain that in early 2007, Lloyd had come to him for advice on the failing marriage. He reportedly had told Ernest that Corryn didn't love him anymore, and Ernest advised him to do whatever it takes to save the marriage. But by July 2007, Corryn had reportedly asked Lloyd to move out and into the spare bedroom to confirm their separation. According to her dad, Corryn was not prepared to live with him anymore, and there were arguments all the time. By this point in the marriage, she had no trust in Lloyd, and she couldn't trust him, especially in regards to their finances or being truthful about money. On August 3rd of that year, just days before Corryn went missing, she had told her dad that Lloyd's family lawyer sent her a nasty letter that was threatening. Those are direct quotes. Nasty, threatening. The day before she went missing, Corryn told her father that she and Lloyd were planning on meeting on the night of August 7th to talk about the next steps of their divorce. The following day, August 8th, Ernest recalls having several phone call conversations with Lloyd, and he'd never asked if he had seen or spoken to Corryn. Once she'd been officially reported missing and her family was being interviewed at the police, Ernest said that Lloyd shed a few tears, but they dried up pretty fast. Another direct quote. According to close friends, making the decision to end her marriage was incredibly difficult for Corryn. She was especially concerned about the effect it would have on their daughters. However, after the decision to separate had been made, many said that it seemed like a weight had been lifted off Corryn's shoulders. One friend even told the West Australian she wanted to go and enjoy life. That's what she wanted to do.
As investigators worked to build a picture of Corryn's life and her final days, their attention increasingly turned toward the people closest to her, especially her husband. On August 22nd, police executed a search warrant at the Rayney family home. But the way they carried it out would later become a major point of discussion. According to later disclosures, Detective Sergeant Mark Mackenzie and other officers approached the visit as though they were simply continuing to gather information about Corryn and her background. They didn't initially tell Lloyd they were there with a search warrant. Mackenzie would later explain that the search was conducted under the guise of attending to victimology issues, rather than as part of an investigation into Lloyd's potential involvement in Corryn's murder. He said, the purpose of this strategy was to ensure Mr. Rayney was not alerted to the warrant. Believing officers were there to learn more about his wife, Lloyd allowed them access to the residence. And around this same time, investigators began making observations about Lloyd's behavior that they found noteworthy. The same detective who had delivered the devastating news that Corryn's body had been found later described seeing Lloyd with his daughters that day. According to Mackenzie, the girls, just 10 and 13 years old at the time, appeared visibly distraught. But he recalled that Lloyd just sat there without any overt emotion and seemed oblivious to everything going on in the room. Whether that reflected shock, grief, personality, or something else entirely would become a subject of enormous scrutiny as the case progressed. Meanwhile, forensics teams continued processing both the burial site and Corryn's vehicle, looking for anything that might explain how she ended up in a shallow grave in Kings Park. One discovery immediately caught investigators' attention. Near the location where Corryn's body was found, police recovered a printed place card bearing Lloyd Rayney's name. Then came the autopsy. Unfortunately, it provided fewer answers than many had hoped. Examiners documented linear markings on the front of Corryn's body, bruising on her back, and indications that her neck may have been broken. Later, during trial proceedings, prosecutors would argue that Corryn died from head, neck, and brain trauma, and that the injuries were the result of actions carried out with an intention to end life. Investigators also noted several other unusual details. Corryn was still clothed when she was found, but her jeans and belt had been undone, and some of her teeth on her zipper were missing. Despite those circumstances, no evidence of sexual assault was identified. And then there was one of the stranger pieces of physical evidence in the case. 3 seed pods from a tree were found in Corryn's hair. There was that particular type of tree located in Kings Park, but it stood more than a half-mile away from where her body was discovered. Investigators also noted that another one of those trees was located in the front yard of the Rayney family home. As police continued piecing together the evidence, Corryn's loved ones gathered to say goodbye. On September 1st, a funeral service was held at her church. During the eulogy, Lloyd spoke about the woman he had known for decades. I always knew myself to be lucky that Corryn was with me, he said. Corryn has been stolen from us in her prime. No words can express the horror of what has happened. But perhaps the most heartbreaking tribute came from Corryn's 13-year-old daughter, Caitlin. Thank you, Lord, for giving me the best mom in the world, she said. She was not only my mom, she was my best friend. Then, less than 3 weeks later, the investigation took yet another dramatic turn. On September 20th, 2007, just over a month after Corryn's body was found, police publicly identified Lloyd Rayney as their prime and only suspect in her murder. For many people who knew him, the announcement was stunning. Friends, colleagues, and former co-workers struggled to reconcile the accusation with the man they thought they knew. One former co-worker told WA Today that Lloyd was one of the nicest people you could meet. But investigators believed they were looking at the person responsible for Corryn's death, and the case against Lloyd Rayney was only beginning. Picture this. It's 11:30 at night. I'm online shopping for one thing, and somehow I've got 6 tabs open, a cart full of stuff I absolutely convinced myself I need, and every single website wants a different login, a different password. Half the time I can't even remember which email I used. Then suddenly I see that little purple Shop Pay button at checkout, and honestly, instant relief. No digging around for my wallet, no password reset spiral, no typing in my card info for the 100th time. Just tap and done. It genuinely makes online shopping so much easier. And if you're selling online, Shopify makes things just as seamless on the business side. You can build a beautiful online store with ready-to-use templates, use AI tools to write product descriptions and improve product photos, plus create email and social media campaigns without needing a whole marketing team. Shopify handles everything from inventory to shipping to returns, basically all the complicated stuff, so you can focus on growing your business. See less carts go abandoned and more sales go with Shopify and their Shop Pay button. Sign up for your $1 per month trial today at shopify.com/murderdiaries. Go to shopify.com/murderdiaries. That's shopify.com/murderdiaries.
Look, if there is one thing about me, it's that I hate waiting. Hold music, triggering. If it was a person, they would definitely be blocked. Earnin, on the other hand, would not be blocked. Earnin is an app, not a bank, that allows you to get up to $150 a day, up to $1,000 between paychecks. Tips are optional, and standard transfers take just 1 to 2 business days with no mandatory fees. Expedited transfers start at $3.99 and cap at $5.99. 5 million people are already using Earnin. Time just feels different when you're not waiting around to make moves. Getting paid twice doesn't make money scarce. It just feels that way. And with Earnin, it doesn't have to be like that. If you think about it, it is kind of odd that we have to wait to get the money that we've already earned, even though we live in a world where everything is instant access now. I don't know. Now that I've thought about it, I cannot unthink it. Download Earnin on the App Store or Google Play. It's spelled like earning money without the G. Type in the Murder Diaries under podcast when you sign up. It will really help our show. Earnin is a financial technology company, not a bank. Access limits are based on your earnings and risk factors. Standard cash outs take 1 to 2 business days with no mandatory fees. Expedited transfers available for a fee. Tips are voluntary and don't affect the service. Available in select states. Terms and restrictions apply. Visit earnin.com for full details.
Starting a business can seem like a daunting task, unless you have a partner like Shopify. They have the tools you need to start and grow your business. From designing a website to marketing to selling and beyond, Shopify can help with everything you need. There's a reason millions of companies like Mattel, Heinz, and Allbirds continue to trust and use them. With Shopify on your side, turn your big business idea into... Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/special offer.
Adobe Firefly is the all-in-one creative studio with AI-powered image and video editing for today's creative process. Built for creators of every kind, Firefly helps you generate, edit, and experiment fast. Because the asks aren't getting smaller, the budgets aren't getting bigger, and the timelines, oh yeah, still tight. With all the best creative AI models in one place, Firefly brings your ideas to life. Unlock a better way to make with Adobe Firefly.
Suffering from dry, tired, irritated eyes? Don't let dry eyes win. Use Sustain Pro. It hydrates, restores, and protects dry eyes for up to 12 hours. Sustain Pro. Triple action dry eye relief.
Choice Hotels get you more of what you value. Here's a little tune to help you remember. Same drive, different day. Don't you wish you were getting away? Pack your bags and come on through. Texas, Ohio, Alaska, we're up there too. Comfort Inn, it's calling your name. Save on the stay. Oh, and free waffles are yours to claim. Well, I hope you like my little song. Book direct at choicehotels.com.
Even though time was passing without any arrests, it was clear that investigators maintained their initial belief that the only suspect was Lloyd Rayney. On September 17, 2008, a little over a year after Corryn's murder, Lloyd filed a defamation lawsuit against the state of Western Australia. He alleged that his reputation had been destroyed by investigators over the past year for absolutely no reason. According to ABC Australia, Mr. Rayney said his reputation as a highly successful barrister was ruined, and he, along with his immediate family, became the subject of public ridicule and abuse. It's actually alleged at this time that both of his daughters were being teased and that every member of the community was already convinced of his guilt. It was also being said that his career had been destroyed. Lloyd's lawyers described one instance saying he was walking through a department store the other day and CCTV footage showed teenagers chasing after him, shouting "murderer." So it's important to resolve this matter as soon as possible. Due to the criminal investigation, though, the defamation action was placed on hold. On December 8th, 2010, more than 3 years after Corryn's murder, Lloyd was pulled over for a traffic stop. He was arrested and charged with the willful murder of Corryn. Lloyd's defense attorney, David Edwardson, later would say it was completely unnecessary for the police to arrest Lloyd in public. He also alleged that the looming defamation lawsuit, which again had been put on hold against the police, had pushed the investigators even further in the direction of assuming Lloyd was guilty. One of the detectives vehemently disagreed, saying the objectivity was maintained all the way through this investigation. Fast forwarding another 2 years, in July of 2012, the trial against Lloyd started. There was no concrete cause of death determined in this case, but a crucial point was discovered. Pollen from the Kings Park area was found in Corryn's nasal passages. This led officials to believe that she was still alive near where she was buried and near the time she was buried, maybe even after she had been buried. More information regarding the Rayneys' failing marriage was revealed during the trial. It turns out Lloyd had been having an affair from year 2000 all the way to 2003. It's in that year that Roy moved to Bermuda for a year for a job. By this time, it was believed that Corryn was aware of the affair and no longer trusted Lloyd. 4 years later, in July 2007, right around the time that Lloyd began sleeping in another room from Corryn, he had recording equipment installed to listen in on Corryn's phone conversations around the house. He allegedly did this in order to find out what her plans was for the divorce and what she and her lawyer had been discussing. More information about the timeline of the night Corryn went missing and was murdered was also revealed. Caitlin, her daughter, who had been at a concert that night, was brought home between 10:40 and 11 p.m. by her friend's mom. The friend's mom said that she did not see Corryn's car at the house. This was crucial to the timeline because the state alleged that Corryn would have arrived home around 9:45 p.m. after her boot scooting class, while their younger daughter Sarah was already asleep. They argued that during that time, Lloyd murdered Corryn, hid her body in the house, and moved her car away from the house where it wasn't visible at the time that her other daughter Caitlin was dropped off. The friend's mother actually says that Lloyd even invited her inside when she dropped Caitlin off, but she kindly said no. It's important to note, too, that she didn't actually recall anything abnormal about his behavior. According to court documents, quote, the accused demeanor suggests that he either exercised a remarkable degree of control or he had not killed the deceased and was unaware of what had happened to her.
Once prosecutors settled on Lloyd Rayney as their suspect, they began constructing a theory of exactly how they believed Corryn's murder unfolded. According to the state, everything happened after the rest of the household had gone to sleep. Prosecutors alleged that after Caitlin went to bed around 11:30 p.m., Lloyd walked to where Corryn's car had been parked and drove it back to the family home. From there, they argued, he dragged Corryn's body across the brick pathway outside the house, placed her into the back seat of her Ford Fairmont, and drove to Kings Park. There, prosecutors said, he buried her in the early hours of August 8th. After leaving the burial site, they alleged he accidentally backed over a bollard while exiting the park, damaging the vehicle's transmission. He then drove to Kershaw Street, abandoned the car around 2:30 a.m., and made his way home. In the state's view, that damaged bollard changed everything. The prosecutor argued that if the vehicle hadn't been damaged that night, creating the transmission fluid leak that detectives later followed into Kings Park, Corryn's body might never have been found at all. And then there was the place card. Days before Corryn's body was discovered, investigators found a printed dinner place card lying in Kings Park near where she would eventually be recovered. Printed on the card were 2 words, Lloyd Rayney. To prosecutors, that wasn't a coincidence. They argued it was one of the most important pieces of evidence in the entire case because it appeared to physically connect Lloyd to the burial site. But the defense offered a very different explanation. According to Lloyd's lawyers, weeks earlier he had attended a dinner function and had been using Corryn's vehicle. They argued the place card had accidentally been left inside the car and somehow ended up at the burial site when the real killer moved Corryn's body from the vehicle to the grave. The problem was that the explanation wasn't airtight. 2 witnesses testified that Lloyd had driven them home from the same dinner party and that he had been driving his own vehicles, not Corryn's. Even so, the court ultimately noted that the uncertainty surrounding the place card cut both ways. One court document stated, "It does not follow that the state has proven guilt. Sometimes an apparently incriminating piece of evidence has an innocent explanation that is not obvious. Sometimes an apparently implausible explanation is true. The state case cannot succeed on the basis of the place card alone." And that became a recurring theme throughout the trial, because while the prosecution's theory was detailed, the defense argued that significant pieces of it simply didn't make sense. In fact, one court document observed that the lack of logic in several areas of this case is obvious when discussing aspects of the state's theory. For example, prosecutors suggested that Corryn was attacked at the family home and later transported to Kings Park. But the defense argued that scenario created its own problems. They contended that Lloyd would never have left Corryn alive but merely unconscious while waiting for Caitlin to return home from the concert, because it would have been far too risky. They also pointed to evidence that pollen had been found in Corryn's nose, which they argued suggested she was still alive when she arrived at Kings Park. The defense also highlighted the complete absence of evidence supporting a key part of the prosecution's timeline. Investigators had conducted extensive inquiries looking for witnesses, surveillance footage, or any indication that Lloyd had made the journey back home after abandoning Corryn's vehicle. Nothing was found. And then there was the physical reality of what prosecutors were alleging. The defense argued that Lloyd lived what they described as a sedentary lifestyle, was in soft physical condition, and suffered from back problems. Their position was that moving Corryn's body from the house to the vehicle, then from the vehicle to the burial site, and then digging a grave large enough to conceal her would have been an enormous physical undertaking for him.
The final document that presented the findings and ruling from the justice, and mind you, this was just the justice, it was not a jury trial, read the following. "I am satisfied from the forensic evidence that the deceased was attacked in the front yard of her home or on the verge immediately outside of her home. While significant, the fact that the deceased was attacked in the area of her home does not in itself prove that the accused carried out the attack. Like the evidence relating to the place card, it is a piece of circumstantial evidence that can be considered in conjunction with the rest of the evidence. The accused does not have to prove an alternative to the state case. The case for the state is beset by improbabilities and uncertainties. Crucial evidence is lacking, and the absence of evidence tells strongly against the state. The accused has engaged in indiscreditable conduct, including knowingly arranging for illegal telephone interceptions, making a false declaration, and giving deliberately false evidence to a court while on oath. The evidence raises suspicion, in some instances quite strong suspicion. But discreditable conduct does not prove guilt, and suspicion, even strong suspicion, falls well short of proof beyond reasonable doubt." Following that statement, on November 1st, 2012, the judge found Lloyd not guilty of the murder of Corryn. Both his daughters continued to support him throughout the trial and afterwards. They were both open about their belief that their father had nothing to do with Corryn's murder. Prosecutors, however, continued to appeal, arguing that the presiding justice didn't give enough weight to what they considered crucial evidence, like the place card. On September 23rd, 2013, the prosecution's appeal against Lloyd's acquittal was dismissed. Over a year and a half later, in May of 2015, Lloyd was found not guilty of arranging the unlawful intercepting of the telephone at the family home. The judge and prosecutors admitted that there wasn't enough evidence for the charge to proceed. Lloyd says that regardless of how he had been treated by law enforcement, quote, "All I want for there to be is a truly independent inquiry into everything surrounding Corryn's death so the killer or killers can be caught." On February 9th, 2016, the Western Australia's State Administrative Tribunal overturned the Legal Practice Board's earlier decision to revoke Lloyd's license to practice law. Lloyd said the following after that decision was made. That's all I've done as an occupation, and I haven't been able to practice for a long time. Like anybody else, it would be nice to be able to earn a living. I haven't done anything wrong. I've acted entirely properly the whole time. I'm confident this decision will show that to be the case.
By this point, the trial had become a battle between two competing narratives, one arguing that the evidence pointed squarely at Lloyd Rayney, and the other arguing that the state's theory required jurors to fill in too many gaps with assumptions. And those gaps would become increasingly important as the case moved forward. Even after Lloyd Rayney's acquittal, the biggest question remained unanswered. If Lloyd didn't kill Corryn, who did? For years, the case sat in a frustrating limbo. Corryn's murder remained unsolved, and her family was still waiting for answers. Then, in 2015, Western Australia's Police Commissioner Carl O'Callaghan announced the case would receive a fresh review. The investigation was being treated as a cold case, and O'Callaghan said a new team would examine the evidence, including a homicide investigator from Queensland and a detective from New South Wales. Importantly, none of the officers assigned to the review had been involved in the original investigation. This is a brand new independent inquiry into who killed Corryn Rayney, O'Callaghan said. And now is the time for anyone with information at all about this crime to make themselves heard. But Lloyd wasn't convinced. While he publicly stated he would cooperate with any efforts to solve Corryn's murder, he questioned whether the review could truly be considered independent if serving Western Australia police officers were still involved. The review is not independent if there are current serving WA police conducting the review, he said. You can't call it independent when it's officers who are investigating previous police that are mates and colleagues. It's as simple as that. As discussions about the case resurfaced, attention once again turned to other individuals whose names had appeared throughout the investigation and trial. Two of the most frequently discussed were Alan Lacko and Ivan Eads, roommates who had lived about 1.5 miles from the Rayney family home. Alan, in particular, had a lengthy and violent criminal history. Prior to Corryn's murder, he had been convicted of sexually assaulting an 11-year-old girl and raping a 29-year-old woman. And there were aspects about his connection to the investigation that raised eyebrows. On the same day Corryn's body was discovered, Alan was stopped while driving and was reportedly found with sand in his boots as well as injuries to his face and hands. Despite this, detectives investigating Corryn's murder didn't examine his clothing. Then there were the statements from an acquaintance of Alan's. According to that witness, Alan once asked him if he could drive a car for me while I dump a body in Kings Park. The same acquaintance also claimed that roughly 4 weeks before Corryn's murder, he and Alan were driving past Kings Park when Alan pointed toward the area and said, "There's a body going in there. There's a body going in there." The witness later said that when he heard about Corryn's murder, he immediately believed Alan was responsible. Even so, investigators never charged him. Police acknowledged that Alan was considered a person of interest, but he was never elevated to the status of suspect. And Alan himself consistently denied having any involvement in Corryn's murder. In a 2015 interview with the Greenlawn Advertiser, he described himself as pro-life. At the same time, he admitted that he had fantasies about killing. He added, "I'll be blunt. If I'm going to kill anybody, it would be a man." His roommate, Ivan Eads, also surfaced repeatedly throughout the investigation and subsequent court proceedings. Ivan had his own criminal history and later pleaded guilty to assaulting a deaf woman after Corryn's murder. One detail involving Ivan generated particular attention. A cigarette butt containing his DNA was reportedly found near the Rayney property. But beyond the fact that it was recovered and mentioned in multiple reports, very little information has ever been publicly released about its significance. No evidence publicly linked the cigarette butt to Corryn's murder, and at least one account characterized its presence as a coincidence. And that's the part of what has made the Rayney case so enduringly controversial. Over the years, numerous names, theories, and alternate suspects have been discussed. But despite reviews, appeals, investigations, and years of public debate, no one has ever been convicted of Corryn Rayney's murder. Nearly 2 decades later, the case remains defined by the same question that emerged the moment Lloyd Rayney was acquitted. If he didn't do it, then who did?
The renewed 2015 investigation into Corryn's cold case did not identify any new information or new suspects. In 2017, the original defamation lawsuit that Lloyd filed against the West Australian Police Department was continued. He was seeking more than $11 million in lost earnings. The state argued that there were plenty of reasonable and justified findings that led to them to name Lloyd as their prime suspect in Corryn's murder, including their failing marriage, Lloyd's, quote, lack of cooperation, and not to mention physical evidence like the seed pods in Corryn's hair. On top of that, there was the statistical likelihood of a woman being killed by her spouse. Several law enforcement officers testified in court agreeing that there was plenty of information to back up their belief at the time that Lloyd was their primary suspect. Friends of Corryn and her family also testified. Her sister said that she had a gut feeling that Lloyd was involved in her sister's murder. Her husband said the same. Again, both of Corryn's and Lloyd's daughters were in support of their father and testified as such. In fact, they openly dismissed the opinion of their mother's families. In regards to why she no longer referred to Corryn's father, her grandfather, as Pappy, Sarah said, because of the actions they have undertaken and the way they have treated my father, my sister, and me, I no longer wish to refer to him as anything so familiar. He is Ernest to me. Now, Lloyd's lawyers said that there were 2 violent sex offenders who lived near the Rayneys and that they were never investigated properly. They said that one of them was alleged to have bragged about dumping a body in Kings Park before Corryn's murder. The lawyers went on to emphasize how fantastically improbable it was that he could have pulled off the murder. In terms of the defamation case, it was not about determining who had murdered Corryn and whether Lloyd was involved. ABC Australia explained it was about determining whether police were justified and reasonable in making the comments that they did, and if they were not determining how much compensation Mr. Rayney should receive. Now, Lloyd ultimately won the defamation lawsuit and was awarded more than $2.6 million in damages. This is one of the highest defamation payouts in the history of the entire country of Australia. Jumping to 2023, Lloyd filed another defamation lawsuit, this time against the senior investigating forensic officer in Corryn's case, Mark Reynolds. Now, way back in 2014, Reynolds had said during a public seminar that there was no need for another investigation into Corryn's murder because the killer, quote, was identified and that he got away with murder, referencing Lloyd, of course. Lloyd did win that lawsuit and was awarded a... Look, if there is one thing about me, it's that I hate waiting. Hold music, triggering. If it was a person, they would definitely be blocked. Earnin, on the other hand, would not be blocked. Earnin is an app, not a bank, that allows you to get up to $150 a day, up to $1,000 between paychecks. Tips are optional, and standard transfers take just 1 to 2 business days with no mandatory fees. Expedited transfers start at $3.99 and cap at $5.99. 5 million people are already using Earnin. Time just feels different when you're not waiting around to make moves. Getting paid twice doesn't make money scarce. It just feels that way. And with Earnin, it doesn't have to be like that. If you think about it, it is kind of odd that we have to wait to get the money that we've already earned, even though we live in a world where everything is instant access now. I don't know. Now that I've thought about it, I cannot unthink it. Download Earnin on the App Store or Google Play. It's spelled like earning money without the G. Type in the Murder Diaries under podcast when you sign up. It will really help our show. Earnin is a financial technology company, not a bank. Access limits are based on your earnings and risk factors. Standard cash outs take 1 to 2 business days with no mandatory fees. Expedited transfers available for a fee. Tips are voluntary and don't affect the service. Available in select states. Terms and restrictions apply. Visit earnin.com for full details. Payout of $438,000. To this day, Corryn's case remains cold, though investigators have said that they investigate any tips or information that come in. Lloyd Rayney still advocates for a completely external, independent investigation into Corryn's murder. Her family remains convinced that Lloyd was responsible for Corryn's death. In 2012, her sister Sharon told ABC Australia that she believed Lloyd was, quote, more interested in the news coverage than finding Corryn. She also said that Lloyd's eulogy at Corryn's funeral was word for word his wedding speech. Sharon also said that she asked Lloyd what he was going to do without Corryn, and he allegedly responded to her saying, "It's like starting a new life." Despite not having answers as to what happened to their mother, Caitlin and Sarah do what they can to focus on the wonderful memories they have of her. Their words are engraved on Corryn's headstone. She was our world, taken too soon, safe now in God's hands, alive in our hearts, our mother and our guide, Caitlin and Sarah.
That's it for this week's episode. Be sure to check us out on social media at the Murder Diaries Pod. We're everywhere: Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. Until then,
Stay safe.
Bye.
Bye.